Okay, all right. Welcome everyone to Nemis Academy. My name is Alina Bonadonna, and I'm extremely happy to welcome everyone to our today's session. And you know why? Because today I have amazing, just lovely speaker. Welcome, Brian Ronholm. And you know why I'm so excited? Because the real director of food policy from Consumer Reports joined our session to have amazing discussion. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks, Selena.
How are
Great to
you?
be with you.
Likewise, how are you doing?
Doing great. It's a beautiful fall day in the Washington, D.C. area, so always a favorite time of year here.
Great. And how is it? How is the weather today at Washington?
It's nice and crisp. It's the high today is going to be like what, mid 60s degrees Fahrenheit. Not sure what that converts to Celsius, but it's always a wonderful time with lots of sun. Certainly my favorite time of year in the D.C. with colors changing and all of that. So.
Yeah, that I believe you 100% because like a few minutes ago it just finished raining, the pouring rain in Zurich, which I'm crazy happy. So the weather here is very tricky. And yeah, I see people are joining. Like just a quick question to all attendees. Can you drop a message in the question room if you hear us well, see us well, so we can start? Because today, while you are guys typing us, if you hear us well or not, I hope yes. Today we will have a kind of special discussion because today we will have no slides. Today we will have just a real talk. I prepared really crispy questions to Brian, and I encourage everyone who is listening to us today also to participate in our discussion and to get probably the best of today's session. And yeah, I don't see any messages from you guys, like just a few words. If the sound is cool and picture is also fine, or at least put the plus and it will be enough. Let me start first that I see you all. Okay, Brian. I think we can start a bit of brief, and I would just ask you briefly, uh, tell us about yourself, and the most important, what inspired you to start career in food policy and food safety?
Yeah, sure. So my background in food policy is primarily on the policy making political side. And so I've been with Consumer Reports for almost 5 years now. And for the international folks, Consumer Reports is primarily a US based uh, legacy publication, if you will. It's primarily known for reviewing automobiles and appliances and electronics and but we also focus on a lot of consumer advocacy, consumer protection work, and that's kind of the side of the organization where I'm on. And prior to joining Consumer Reports, I spent a lot of time in government. I was a deputy undersecretary for food safety at USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, during the administration of President Obama. And then prior to that, I worked on Capitol Hill as a congressional staffer for a congresswoman from Connecticut, Rosa DeLauro. And that is where kind of my career in food policy started because that was an issue area that she was very much involved in. It was very active on. And so when I joined her office, that was one of my issues in my portfolio. And that's how I got to learn a lot, got to establish a lot of connections and build a network of not only former fellow consumer advocates, but also a lot of industry folks, and it really provided a just a great viewpoint into to policy making, and that's kind of where that knowledge base started. It's kind of where the passion started too. Just having that opportunity to meet with such a variety of people and getting their perspective, and it's been a tremendous experience, and I feel very fortunate to have ended up where I am working on these issues on a constant basis.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian. And I see that people woke up a bit and texted us that they hear us and see us well. And guys, can you also type us from where you are listening to us? Because we are kind of international community as well, like from all over the globe. For example, at my time, it's now 5 p.m. Brian, what time is? Because I'm always mess up with these time zones.
Yeah, I think we got to we did mix up the time zones a bit. So in the East Coast of the U.S., it's a little after 11 o'clock. So
Oh, yeah.
for those who are at 5 o'clock right now, they're probably, enjoying a beverage, and it's probably
Yeah, while some of us can start already having dinner, others lunch, I should say, or brunch. Enjoy your meal if you have so. And I have another question to you, Brian. Like you mentioned, so really diverse and cool background, but definitely, what exact part of your experience draw your passion for advocating a safer and healthier food system?
yeah. I think primarily for me, Alina, it was in the jobs that I've had and the experiences that I've had previously. I had a tremendous opportunity to meet with uh, not only consumer advocates, but also more importantly the families who've been impacted by foodborne illness, and that can be really just an eye-opening experience, and just provides so much clarity as to why food safety is so important. And I believe you've had Darren Detweiler on previously. Hearing about his story, and others. I recall specifically a meeting I had when I was at the U.S. Department of Agriculture with this couple who lost their 8-year-old son to E. coli from eating a hamburger. And it was, I'm sorry, not hamburger, but it was a ground, I think, ground turkey. And it was just, it was almost traumatic, not traumatic, but it was very moving, being able to talk to them and share their pain and cry with them. And part of it for me was at the time, my one son, he was around the same age at the time. So just putting myself in their shoes, like what it would be like to lose their child simply just from eating a type of food. And it's things like that, hearing their stories and talking to other families about how they were able to take this experience and turn it into a lifelong passion. It was very moving, and certainly something that resonated with me.
Yeah, that's really just crazy experience, and hopefully we will have upcoming discussion with Darren as well in a couple of months. I will not spoil this. And referring to our attendees, actually we are really super globally because we have people from Switzerland, from US, Chicago, also from Saudi Arabia. At what time is now in Saudi Arabia? Like, sorry, I'm really very lost. Also, we have visitors from Ghana and Nigeria. So, guys, happy to see you all. And referring basically to these horrible recalls, uh, that's really crazy. But with all these recurring outbreaks, for example, like one of recent was salmonella in charcuterie products. Do you think there were really some major lessons learned by manufacturers and regulators, and in regards of traceability, how does traceability play the role in these situations?
Yeah, I think every recall, every outbreak provides some lessons for everyone involved, whether it's regulators, industries, consumers. So there's and because each recall is unique, and there are some similar patterns, but there are some unique perspectives, unique circumstances to each one, and those lessons can be applied to overall policy. In terms of traceability, it's such a critical piece to the food safety system because you want to have that ability to immediately trace back whenever there's an outbreak to the source of the problem. Because the quicker that you're able to do that, the quicker you're able to remove a lot of these products from commerce and limit the outbreak as quickly as possible. So that's why recently we're having some deliberations in the US about the traceability rule and its complexities. And there's no doubt that there are some significant complexities to implementing traceabilities pieces to the system. But from a consumer perspective, it doesn't matter. We need to have a system in place as quickly as possible in order to have any kind of effective system that allows for regulators to reach back on a very immediate basis to identify the products involved, locations, facilities, what have you, and to be able to quickly remove those products from commerce, because that's the only way we'll be able to, once there's an outbreak, to prevent an expansion of a recall, expand or illnesses. So yeah, traceability is a key component to this whole system. And, the longer we wait for something like that to be put into effect, the more harmful it is to consumers.
And do you think, I should say, not think, do you believe that these recent high-profile recalls will lead to a push for more stringent traceability measures? And
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, no, I certainly hope so. Certainly in the US last year, there was a recall involving heavy amounts of lead in applesauce pouches that were targeted toward young kids. And I think everyone knows who does work on heavy metals that it doesn't take much lead to really impact the health and increase the risk of harm in children. So it's really important to get those products off store shelves once it became apparent that there was a problem. However, there were a lot of those products that were still available on store shelves when even after the recall was announced. And a big piece of that is there wasn't an effective traceability system in place that allowed for regulators and to identify what products were involved and where they were located to be able to take that initiative and to make that move to remove those products. And so that's any recall in which there is a delay in getting these products off the market means that there is some traceability improvements that need to be made, and it really underscores the importance of it.
Mhm. And what role, on your opinion, consumer advocacy play in shaping these changes?
Consumer advocacy can play a very major role in improving traceability measures. Right now, the FDA is deliberating whether to delay the compliance date of the traceability rule that was included in the Food Safety Modernization Act, and many of you probably have heard it known as FSMA. And this is a this was a law that went into effect in January 2011. And
Mhm.
here we're almost 14 years later that, the compliance date for the traceability is going into effect. It's scheduled to go into effect in January 2026. And there's an effort right now by some pockets of the industry to delay that compliance date for a couple of years, and so that they can conduct more pilots. And from a consumer advocacy standpoint, enough is enough. We've known for years that this was forthcoming since 2011 when the bill was signed into law. And understanding that it took FDA forever to put together a rule and they had to be taken to court in order to facilitate that process. But we've all known that this was coming. 14 years is a long time to study for a final exam. And so, you're either prepared or you're not. And 14 years is a lot of time to prepare. So we knew this was coming. And so there should have been some initiative to put something in place where industry can be compliant.
Yeah, and probably I do believe that there were some initiatives made by Consumer Reports, right? And were there any like specific key advocacy initiatives done by the company where you are working currently in leading to promote a safer and healthier food system?
Yeah, a lot of our work is going before policymakers, regulators, Congress, and uh, letting them know and emphasizing and underscoring the importance of food safety initiatives, particularly traceability. And it's also trying to push back when there are attempts to try to delay the compliance date for that particular provision. So it's educating policymakers on the impact a delay would have, and also educating lawmakers about what would happen at the FDA if this compliance date was pushed back. Um, a lot of times when these types of initiatives at FDA get pushed back, FDA tends to kind of put them aside and let them languish. And that would be an acute danger of that happening here, in that eventually it could become one of those issues that continues to languish, the compliance date continues to get pushed back, and during that time, there's more excuses being formulated as to why it's so complex. Um, Ultimately, there can be a period where there's you're educating while you're regulating, and there can be some enforcement discretion in that, providing some flexibility for these industries to find the right technologies to become compliant, and allowing some flexibility to do that without enforcement. So.
Yeah, and if in general, like we reflect to time when you worked at the USDA, were there any key specific lessons learned that you would apply to your current role as the past experience, considering
Yeah,
also previous issues?
yeah. Yeah, Alina, I think the biggest lesson that I learned working as a regulator at the U.S. Department of Agriculture is how the regulatory process can be very, very slow and very deliberate. And that's meant to be on purpose, because the key is to absorb a lot of information from various stakeholder groups, and taking that information to process and analyze to formulate ultimately the best policy at the end of the process. Um, it, it, but again, it can be from a consumer perspective when you're thinking about consumer protection measures, whether it's traceability, whether it's salmonella standards, what have you. It can become very, very frustrating when you're waiting years and years for something that for a type of policy that can be very helpful in the immediate future. And so it's trying to take that information, knowing how the regulatory process works, and converting that and using consumer advocacy tools to try to facilitate the process quicker, so that
Mhm.
it's not as slow and deliberate and frustrating from a consumer perspective.
Yeah, so does it mean that basically everything what is written and promised, it's not as transparent on practical way?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, because like currently, especially with the recent really big case, I think of course everyone know the famous brand Boar's Hat, which is currently involved in the national recall of different meat products. And if we are talking about such cases, is there any like general way on the matter of like from the governmental side also how to communicate better with consumers so they will not lose trust and they will not be so scared to buy food and to basically to consume it?
Yeah. I mean, trust is a really big issue, and with the boar's head situation, there's a lot of trust that has been lost, um, when it comes to how the company operated, how the regulators operated. So it's multi-layers, and I think it's going to take a lot of work for Boar's Head to restore their brand, restore consumer confidence. And Boar's Head is known in the U.S. particularly as as a high quality product. That's how they've advertised themselves. But when you dig a little deeper, and look into the details linked to this particular recall, you find that they really took shortcuts when it comes to trying to control listeria. They did the bare minimum. When you look at the inspection reports and it talks about the gross sanitary conditions that existed at that facility and how those conditions posed an imminent threat to the safety of their products. And how do you, as a consumer, trust that brand anymore when those conditions existed at the facility? And then you look at the regulatory side, the inspection side. They knew that these conditions existed because they were written in the inspection report. But there was a significant time gap between when those conditions were when they were made aware of those conditions until when they acted. And so when you have that time gap, it really is obviously increases the harm for consumers, and you lose trust about the regulators. And this is a system where an inspection an inspector was at the facility on a continuous basis every day when it's operating. And yet still it didn't translate into any type of meaningful action by the regulator until it was too late. And it's very difficult, if you're a family member of those who got sick or died, it's very difficult to put any type of trust in the company itself and the regulators.
Yeah. Uh, we actually got also one question from our attendees from Yulian Isen. Question is, could you give specific examples how traceability is achieved in the food industry and why it has not been optimal until now? What technologies are used and what are their requirements in the new law?
Well, yeah, what I found interesting about the recent deliberations about traceability, particularly, is the availability of off-the-shelf technology that is available to the industry to comply with the traceability rule. But yet there's still pushback from certain industry that it's too complex, and we can't do it. One size can't fit all, and certainly completely understand that argument. But what undercuts it a little bit is when there are companies that reach out to Consumer Reports and other consumer advocates, and they tell us that essentially those concerns are being overstated and that we have the technology that can do a lot of this stuff for them, understanding that it comes with a cost. And that's a big consideration for certain parts of the industry, especially the smaller businesses. Um, so I'm not like a technical traceability expert, but based on everything, so I wouldn't be able to walk you through each step in the traceability process as to what would be required. But when you have several industry companies coming to you and say, this technology exists now to comply with the rule, and not only that, it's already being done, and there are a lot of retailers that reached out to their suppliers and indicated you need to be compliant with the rule sooner than the compliance date of January 2026. So when you see examples like that, that it clearly demonstrates that it's possible and that it can be done, and that we can't really wait for more excuses.
Yeah, thank you. And Brian, in your experience, what are the biggest misconceptions consumers have about foodborne illnesses in general and food safety? And is there any ways the industry can address it?
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception that I encountered during my time in government is the consumer's understanding of how an outbreak investigation occurs. Um, as we all know, that it can be incredibly complex. When regulators are investigating the source of an outbreak, and it's first of all you have to figure out, like, is it under the USDA jurisdiction, or is it under FDA jurisdiction? And then for those who are not familiar, uh, USDA has jurisdiction over meat, poultry, processed eggs, and catfish, and FDA has authority over essentially everything else. So you got to kind of navigate that. But also there's the interviewing people who became ill and going through their essentially their meal history. Like what did you consume over the last 10 days? And for any of us, when we're asked that question, we can all barely remember what we had for breakfast yesterday morning, unless you're eating the same thing every day, or what we had for lunch 5 days ago, right?
Yeah.
It's situations like that that really can complicate an investigation. It can draw it out because the regulator is trying to capture information that's very difficult um, to get clear information about, and that can draw out investigation. And it's easy when you're not involved in a particular outbreak. It's easy to say, well, why can't they just move quickly to figure this out? It should be pretty easy, and it's not. And then there are so many other steps after that. And I think overall that's the biggest misconception that consumers may have about how difficult it can be to combat foodborne illness.
Yeah, before I ask my questions, continuing this topic, I want just to come back a bit for the to traceability topic because we got a question. Uh,
Mhm.
Question is, what should be a standard method for the traceability of salmonella, if there is some, of course.
I'm sorry, a standard. Uh,
Like if there is some maybe standard method for food traceability of Salmonella case specifically. Probably it's related to recent recalls, maybe about some specific procedures of acting, whatever. Like,
yeah, I think from a salmonella policy standpoint, the key would be to have standards in place that could prevent the illness in the first place. And I know that's kind of an easy answer, right? But right now, USDA is considering a salmonella rule that would kind of allow for a final product standard for salmonella. And and I apologize if I'm not really directly addressing the question, but it's such a key piece that's happening right now where they have this rule that's pending that allows for better work to be done on salmonella and ultimately a better job of kind of tracing where problems are, where as it involves certain products, certain serotypes, strains, uh, uh, and tracing them to where the problems lie. It's about picking the focusing on the strains that actually cause human illness and developing policies around that, as opposed to having a general standard where, as we know, there's some salmonella types that are harmless, and yet under our current system, the industry is able to get credit for addressing that. Well, that of course is not helpful to consumers, and industry even itself acknowledges that. And there certainly is a coalition involved to try and come up with a better system that allows for the identification and tracing the the types of strains that actually make people sick, and so making sure that the policy focuses on addressing that and eliminating those.
thank you, Brian. And guys, I again encourage you to ask as much question as you can because we are just like running out of time. And believe me, guys, I have enough question to fill out the the stream. Yeah, because extremely topic we are discussing today. And Brian, coming back to the previous answers about recalls, this funny thing that general in Switzerland, when someone sees the information about recall, it it's really quite cumbersome. Look, I think also in US like this. And for example, how supermarkets react, they basically only have a small labels at the front door and that's it.
Yeah.
Maybe, like, on your opinion, what steps should government and private sectors take to ensure that outbreak information is shared maybe transparently and promptly in a better way, not so scary, like, What
Yeah.
do you?
Yeah, Alina, this is, recalls is an issue that we are struggling with, and that's everyone. It's regulators, it's industry, it's consumers. How do we best communicate that information in a way that's easy for consumers to understand and respond to and react to? It's a problem that's long existed, and a lot of us are really trying to work on it. And I remember, the issues that we faced when I was at USDA is similar to the issues that they're facing now. How do we push this information out to folks so that they can be made aware? Obviously people aren't getting their news the same as they did before. No one's sitting in front of the TV at 6:30 p.m. and watching the news and seeing if there's information there. There's so much more, there's more options available to capture this type of information. How do we best leverage that? And that's something that industry is struggling with, agencies are struggling with, because it's so multifaceted. There's so many touch points. It's difficult to identify what's best. No one, consumers aren't going to be subscribing to email alerts from government agencies. That's just not what people do, right? I mean, they're not going to, if they're on TikTok, Instagram, what have you, they're not subscribing to USDA content or FDA content. Um, it, it- so, but that's where a lot of information is gleaned right now. So it's a constant struggle. It's we're all trying to work on it. Consumer Reports has a food traceability, a food recall, a notification system where you can input your cell phone number and you can have major recall information get sent to you, and that's not perfect because it's only focusing on the national multi-state recalls, right? And as we know, recalls can be, restricted to a particular region and a particular product. So you don't want to push out information to everyone in the nation if the recall is only limited to a particular region. So that's another piece of this that we struggle with. Like, how do you tailor that information? How do you come up with a recall system notification process that allows for the right information to get pushed out to consumers at the right time?
Yeah, but at the same time, I remember it was actually this year one E. coli case, E. coli outbreak was linked extremely widespread, even throughout TikTok. So
Yeah,
sometimes it really comes super, super far when it's really something crazy, but unfortunately, or fortunately, you never know. But of course, it's better
yeah,
to know. But like
yeah, yeah. And there's another piece of this too, is like a lot of recalls in the US are associated with allergens. And that only impacts, I don't want to dismiss it. I mean, it's certainly harmful to those who have the allergies, but there are a lot of other people who don't have the allergies. And so they're not going to be interested in that information. And so that's just, that adds to the complexities of trying to come up with an efficient and effective recall notification system.
yeah. We got a few more questions. So one of it is, what would be good source for consumers to inform themselves about food safety risks, apart from what we mentioned?
So a good source of being, obviously Consumer Reports would be a very good source for consumers to access. Um, uh, and the government agencies, USDA, FSIS, the Food Safety and Inspection Service, the Food and Drug Administration, they have very good information on their websites about food safety practices that can reduce a consumer's risk. Um, excuse me. One of the big campaigns that agencies typically tend to run is the food safety at home, food safe handling, clean, separate, cook, and chill. The four main components that allows you to reduce your risk of foodborne illness at home. There are a lot of resources out there, not only just government, but obviously consumer advocacy organizations. In addition to advocating for policies, they're also going to provide information to consumers on what they can be doing to minimize their risk. And hopefully it's a matter of identifying the right resources, the right sources of this information, and making sure that they're trustworthy, and you can rely on that without any type of influence or conflict. And so that, yeah, I mean, ultimately there is a lot of information out there, and that can also be a problem if there's a lot of, it's hard to kind of coalesce um, behind one particular resources. And there are some other NGOs that work exclusively about on this, like one I'm involved in called the Partnership for Food Safety Education. And it involves a group of not only consumer groups, but industry and regulators, and we're all trying to get to the same, address the same problem.
Yeah. And what can food producers do to proactively show to consumers that they are prioritizing food safety and quality?
Yeah, it's transparency. It's kind of difficult for industry, right? Because a recall is obviously a failure, but there's so many times when there's not a recall, and it's not something that they can really trumpet. And yeah, it's a matter of being transparent to consumers about their safety practices. And I think of the recent example of Boar's Head, the listeria policy in the U.S. The establishments are given three options to address uh, listeria. The one that involves the least amount of work, or least costly in the eyes of many in the industry, is the third option, which relies solely on sanitation to control listeria, and it's supposed to be supported by test results. But as we've discovered, that's not what had happened at that facility. So that's kind of a way you lose trust. If you want to gain the trust of consumers, it's being really out front saying, we're choosing the most stringent option, the best option available to control listeria. Um, and yeah, and there's a lot of work to be done to restore that confidence, knowing that there's that industry is forthcoming, being transparent, not only on things like this, but when it comes to heavy metals, chemicals and dyes, and label claims. So it's certainly multi layers when you think about trying to restore consumer confidence.
Yeah, and actually, that's good that you mentioned by yourself Listeria, because it was one of my next questions. Because currently we do see really a lot, like I should say, majority of outbreaks in Europe related to persistent bacteria like Listeria in the food factory environment. And what's, in your opinion, could be improved to prevent recalls due to this microbiological contamination?
The thing about listeria is, as everyone knows, it can be very difficult to control. And so when it ends up in an environment, it takes substantial amount of cleaning to try to address the problem. And you think of the grocery store deli environment and how difficult it can be to control listeria once it's introduced in that process. Because once after the Boar's Head recall, grocery store delis were advised to do a complete dump and clean, dump all products, and do a very thorough cleaning of your facilities. So this, and these listeria outbreaks are occurring as we have a zero tolerance policy in the U.S. For listeria, because it can be difficult and how harmful it can be. So I think obviously continuing the zero tolerance policy is going to be critical for this, and it's going to require a lot of kind of follow up from regulators when there is a discovery of a problem, not with just listeria, but others. So, and I just use again as Boers has it as an example, there doesn't appear to be any adequate follow up after discovering the gross sanitary conditions, the presence of listeria. That should have triggered a thorough food safety assessment of a very detailed audit, if you will, of the facility, which I believe did happen. But even with that, there doesn't appear that corrective actions were taken by Boar's Head, and that it led to this particular outbreak. So it's maintaining the zero tolerance policy for listeria. It's going to require regulators following up intently when it's discovered, so that these problems can be prevented.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And also, we got one more question. How we identify exactly allergens in any food? Probably that's it. Like there is no. Probably it's about methodology or like the different tests. Yeah. How do we
Yeah,
identify?
I think that's what it's going to be. And allergen is such a complex issue in the U.S. because there are not as many major allergens declared compared to what exists in other parts of the world, particularly the EU. I believe there are, I don't know if I have the numbers correct, but I believe there are 14 or so major allergens in the EU, and there's only seven in the US, or eight. So that in itself creates a complexity, and you also have certain parts of industry who really push back on any proposals that declare other items a major allergen subject to a recall. And you also have a system that allows, when sesame was declared a recall, you had certain parts of the industry um, add add sesame to their products just to get around some of the requirements. So, when consumers see actions like that, it really makes it difficult to kind of trust how they're operating.
Yeah, there is one question request from Karen Hobbs. She said, like, can you provide a link of information to sign up for the Consumer Reports Recall Alert? And exactly the one I'm sending right now. I hope I found the right one because it called like Food Safety Alert with a request to log in. So
Yep,
I hope
that's
everyone received it. Yeah, because like the comment of Karen is this is important for many food establishments to know, since some do not use distributors to obtain their ingredients. Regular alerts, whatever they pertain to them or not, will help them be more aware of their ingredient purchases. That's definitely true.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. And I'm also putting in the chat, and hopefully it's made
Yes.
available to
Yeah.
everyone. Is This is a code that allows for 30 days free access to Consumer Reports. So for those who want to just kind of explore the publication, obviously a lot of our stuff is online now, and if you're in the market for a new vehicle or new appliance, by all means, kind of take advantage of the ratings, reviews that are on the site in the 30 days, and hopefully others you want to stay on as a subscriber, that would be great too. Um, yeah, I mean, one of you know, we feel like we're a trusted brand when it comes to consumers. So, food safety alert, we'd want consumers to be able to trust that information and know that we're providing it in a meaningful way. And I know there's a lot of grocery store loyalty programs uh, are often identified as another option, and those can be effective. But I also know that there are some privacy concerns about how they use the information. Is it directed only to well-to-do customers in terms of how they use that information? So that's why it's really, really important that there be some sort of independent system that can get this information out to consumers.
Yeah, definitely. And there are also some European resources. Actually, I can share it after. Like, anyway, this webinar will be placed on our YouTube channel, and all the links we mentioned today and plus more, I will publish under the video. And again, thank you, Karen, as well. Karen wrote me, thank you, Alina. Nice to see you again. We met with Karen in Amsterdam in the latest Food Integrity Global, which was also related uh, to different food safety, like in general, to food safety community, and we discussed different topics there as well. Always pleasure to meet people you met in person and who are attending
Yeah.
webinars. Yeah, there is another question. Talking about traceability, what is European regulation expectation to this?
I, I will admit to not be an expert on European traceability regulations. And Alina, I don't know if you are, if you.
Not 100%, yeah, unfortunately, but definitely it's a good point for me to notice that next speaker had to be really expert in this field. So I will note this question, and we just came back later on with a broader answer from the expert. Yeah, and Brian, next question I have, it's really very interesting to know how, in general, consumer attitude changed, and if there any research done about, in general, consumer attitude towards food safety, and if there are any emerging trends. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think, Alina, that we're certainly going through a time, particularly over the last 10, 15, 20 years, where people, consumers want more information about how food is produced, what kind of ingredients are in them. There's certainly a lot more awareness about food policy, the food system, than there ever has been, right? And so part of that is the way the attitudes have shifted is, wait a second, we've always just kind of taken our food supply for granted. Meanwhile, under the surface, there's just so much going on in terms of how this food is made, how it's produced, how, what kind of ingredients are in it that we may not be aware of. You look at an ingredient list on a food packaged item, and you see names that are hard to pronounce and that are really long, and you just kind of assume that it's safe. You hope that it's safe. But there's kind of minimal information about what kind of long-term risks are involved. So we've certainly seen that translate into more engagement on consumer reports as it relates to food. Just when we look at initiatives that are directly related to food chemicals or heavy metals, uh, the response rate, the metrics that everyone's familiar with, those are the things that generate the most action, the most clicks, the most interest. Clearly, those types of issues resonate with them, and it's kind of strange because food issues like chemicals and heavy metals, they resonate more than say the pathogen side, like E. coli, salmonella, listeria. So when you're looking at the metrics of what people are clicking, they're more interested in kind of the potential long-term risk that is posed by certain food chemicals, dyes, heavy metals, etc. But the pathogens that can cause immediate harm to health, like E. coli, salmonella, they're less interested in, right? So it's kind of a weird juxtaposition that you would think that it would be flipped, that there'd be more concern about the types of things that can kill you in a short amount of time. So it's it, it's been interesting to see how the attitudes have shifted, how there's more attention on how these ingredients end up in our food supply.
Yeah, and do you see actually the influence of emerging technologies, especially like everyone is talking about AI now? And do you see the influence of AI specifically in food safety practices and in general in shaping the industry's future?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we see some of it already. Um, I think AI can be helpful in predicting outbreaks of certain products at certain times of year, just based on historical data, just absorbing all of the production data that's available and understanding, that allowing us to understand what time of year poses the highest risk for certain products. And that will be very helpful to have that information once that technology continues to evolve, and it will help address. I'm sure it's helpful from an industry perspective. It's certainly helpful from a policy making perspective, um, and from a consumer perspective too. It allows them to anticipate what types of products to avoid certain times of year if that in fact ends up being the case.
Yeah, definitely. And are there any specific currently technology-driven solutions, like which will be really critical to address future risks?
At this point, I don't. I'm not following that side of the issue closely. Part of the reason is, as an independent organization, we certainly monitor technology that's available. We want to minimize discussion about it because we don't want to give the appearance that we may be endorsing a
Yeah.
particular technology, a particular company's product. Um, we fiercely maintain our independence. But yeah, I mean, we certainly are aware. We read the journals, we read articles, and we understand, what technologies are being developed that can be really, really helpful. And it can run the gamut. We talked about traceability, the companies that reached out to us and explained that we have the technology that would allow companies to comply with the traceability rule. We've heard it from companies that can test for salmonella in a very, very short amount of time. That was a piece that the system has always struggled with is how do you get um, test results that you can feel confident about in an immediate time frame to allow regulators and industry to respond and consumers to respond. So yeah, we're certainly monitoring and aware of the possibilities that technologies can offer.
Yeah, definitely. And just la last call for those who still was kind of shy to address any question. You still have time. But me, I would ask Brian, if we come back to the initial topic of our webinar, what what are the top three priorities for restoring consumer confidence in the supply?
Okay, so we probably covered a lot of this material
Yeah.
throughout our discussion today, right? And first and foremost is is our regulatory system, is our inspection system adequate? Can it truly prevent illness? And as we've seen from the boar's head example, and from what we've seen from the applesauce pouches from last year, there's still a lot of work to be done on that. I will say that it was interesting that in there was a food safety news article about warning a firm about listeria in ice cream, and it was next to an ad from Nemis about this particular webinar. So it was coincidental and almost ironic because when you click on the article and get more information about that particular investigation, the timeline went something like they discovered illnesses in August 2023. The FDA inspection didn't occur until February, March 2024. And then the warning letter just went out this past September. So, something like that, when you see a kind of a slow, ineffectual time frame, as it relates to especially a listeria, which can be very harmful, it's very difficult to have consumers trust that system, right? So I will say another item is what's we call the secret grass process. And those who aren't familiar, it's a generally recognized as safe process at FDA. Essentially, what it allows for is a self-regulate industry to self-regulate food chemicals. And you know, we would all be horrified if we ever encountered a situation where somebody slipped something into our food or bread or beverage while we weren't paying attention. But that's exactly what's allowed to happen in the US now under this secret grass process, in that a company can introduce a chemical, um, determine on its own that it's safe, and then put it out in the marketplace, and just hope for the best. Now, you would hope that most of the industry folks would do very comprehensive studies to ensure the safety of it. But because it's notification to FDA is voluntary, there's nothing to require them to submit any information and make it available anywhere, whether it's to regulators or consumers. So that is a big piece that I think is going to be very, very difficult to restore confidence for consumers in the food supply.
Yeah, but
Sorry.
I believe that we will deal with it in any way with the availability of such cool resources. And a bit more of education, of self-education, and then we are fine. Just to check myself, is it the right article I found? Because I try to follow all the news from food safety news, but of course some of them can be not the right one. So it's like FDA warns firms about listeria, right? So that's the right
Yes,
one.
that's the one.
Okay. Yeah, I made it on purpose to put your advertisement next to this one to get more.
Sorry.
Okay, guys. Yeah. Actually, we have just a few minutes left. Brian, maybe some of like the closing remarks from your end. How would you summarize our session today?
Uh, yeah, no, happy to. Lena, this has been a tremendous opportunity. Thank you so much for inviting me. And hopefully this has been helpful to folks to give you a sense of how Consumer Reports operates, maybe consumer advocates in general. We certainly base our advocacy strategy on, how responsive our members, our subscribers are to, articles and our work. And it's not just kind of throwing a dart at a dartboard and figuring out what we're going to be focused on. It's obviously monitoring current events and how that matches up with the priorities of our membership and finding some harmony in that. And so it's, consumers, there's a lot that consumers are burdened with just in terms of monitoring the food supply. It's something that we take for granted, and we have such an emotional connection to food. We all do, and so you want everything to work out, and so we have a tendency to shy away from kind of the difficult questions and difficult problems, and so it's a matter of facing them, and consumers shouldn't have such an undue burden. It's, we're the last piece of we're all consumers. We're the last part of the farm to fork process. And so there's a lot that happens before the food ends up on our plates. And so, consumer advocates, we certainly have a role, we have a responsibility, but so does industry, so do regulators. It's all a matter of, finding collaboration when we can and combating the things that make us sick. And it's certainly something that regulators are focused on. And I know industry certainly has a brand that they need to protect. And there are times when they could do a better job of protecting that brand. And so it's very important for us to collaborate, work together to get toward that end.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thanks to everyone who joined our session today. From my side, I just want to invite you for our future webinars, and the link to register is also in the chat room. So guys, the recording will be published in our LinkedIn page and also in our YouTube. And if you will have more questions, you are always welcome to text to me to my email address, which is also will be added. And wish you a nice evening, the ones who has evening, and the ones who just started work, just wish you a resourceful day. And see you next time. Bye.
Thank you, Alina.
Bye.